All right, this is a lecture on Tennessee Williams, the great Tennessee Williams, Streetcar Named Desire, probably his greatest work. Um, so let's see, in interpreting Mr. Williams here in this, it can get a little tricky. It's not the hardest play to read for most of my students, but there's a lot more going on than is apparent. I guess a little, Tennessee Williams is probably among the most personal writers. And of the writers we covered, probably only Sylvia Plath I would put as being, equally sort of personal in her work. And what Williams does tend to do is sort of extrapolate this gallery of characters and things that kind of spring from his imagination, but it always is sort of close to him. He's, for the most part, not making that much social commentary, but although he ends up making some anyway. And I think to really start to understand Williams in this play, we have to dig into a little bit to Williams' biography. I'll be somewhat quick about it, but anyway, Tennessee Williams, born Tom Williams in Mississippi, ends up moving to, I think, St. Louis, and when he's, I want to say 10, 12, somewhere in that age. And so he's a product, of the deep South, when the end of the Civil War was still sort of within memory of a lot of people around him. The Emancipation Proclamation is 1865, and again, Williams is running his plays about 80 years after that. So it's 75 years or so after when he's growing up. But still, it's the older people still remember, and it still kind of cast a shadow over everything. Essentially, the South was a proud culture. It was a sinful culture. The absolute original sin of our country, right? Which is white supremacy, rises, right from the slave trade. If you can own people, and do the horrific things slave owners do to slaves, you need a narrative to sort of explain that away. And the narrative basically they come up with is that the black people really are inferior and they basically deserve to be treated like cattle. So from that, that does, you can never extract that out from the South. However, Williams isn't dealing with that too much, at least not this play. He's not. And if you were, one of the white majority in the South, and especially if you were near the top of the food chain, and that's not what Tennessee Williams was, though that is what he's going to present Blanche as. Life could be actually sort of genteel and even beautiful if you can ignore again some of the horror that was supporting the economy. And there was a system of manners and of chivalry, and again, this was there was a real way of life to the South that informed the South and provided meaning in everyone's life. They were all a part of this thing, and it made them special somehow to be a South. They were proud, and to have that just completely collapse. And again, as Tennessee Williams is writing, they still haven't dealt with. The Martin Luther King Jr. is still off. He hasn't quite arrived yet. He's not far behind now. But there's still the Little Rock Eight, and then there's still all these threshold moments, Montgomery bus boycott of civil rights, 20th century civil rights movements that are just sort of percolating now, and so their culture is one that's been sort of pulverized, and whatever is going to rise up in its place has not really happened yet. They're still in this sort of purgatory, and a very painful one for everyone involved. Again, and I'm not equating here. Certainly, to feel any of us feel much more for the black folk in the South than the white, but it's still for everyone involved. It was not a good time. And anyway, his family, is raised. He's raised in all this. His mother, who is a woman who had a serious mental illness. She had something called logorrhea, which is um, an incessant need to incessantly babble and talk just to talk. And the only way her children could get their mother's attention would be to sit there and have to listen to this nonsense. And oftentimes, too, she was a vindictive woman. She was a resentful woman. Her husband was an awful at least in the family, kind of a terrible guy. The parents were always at war. Father used his fists on I think everyone in the family, and it was just a brutal atmosphere to have grown up with. And this is a very sensitive sort of kid, and but again, as hard as, and the father, openly, made fun of his son, who was he got very sick when he was young. He's one of these kids who couldn't play gym with the other boys. I think he was very small. I think he only grew to be 5'4" or something, and but he was bright, exceptionally bright. And again, a sensitive young kid. His sister Rose became his constant companion. They would never sort of leave each other. And but his mother would also constantly complain about the father and how he cheated on her and how terrible, things you shouldn't be talking to your kids about, right? And he'd had to listen to sort of all this. And then as his beloved sister Rose gets into teenagehood, she descends into sort of which is essentially nymphomania. She was sleeping around with a lot of different guys. And, like a lot of girls were doing that. And again, this was something, again, I think, in 2020 America, we kind of, we don't look at that nearly the way the South, or for that matter, St. Louis, would have looked at it in the 1930s, when this was taking place. So, what his mother did buy him was a typewriter. That became his sort of escape. He started writing compulsively. He developed what's called graphomania, which is he couldn't stop writing, even though he often struggled with deadlines and actually finishing what he was supposed to finish. Was another matter, but he wrote like 6 to 8 hours a day. It was like he needed to do it, which is rare, by the way, especially for serious writers. But a lot of his writing was letter writing, journaling, and things like. It wasn't all, and again, he wasn't always working on what he was supposed to be. But that's his background. And again, forever thereafter, it was his sister. After and his sister Rose would tell him about these guys and sort of, because she'd always confided in them. But no brother wants to hear those things, about their sister, and it was just driving him crazy. And when they said something horrible to her, sort of snapped at her, I don't ever want to see your ugly face again or something, and sort of stormed off. And he'd never, I guess, spoken like that to her. And she went downstairs, and while after this happened, I guess she's sitting upstairs upset. And the mother and father are getting into it. Dad's drunk or whatever in the kitchen, and she grabs a pair of scissors, walks downstairs, and buries the pair of scissors in the father's shoulder, and father, dad gets taken to the hospital, and I think Rose ended up off to the nervous hospital, and and she ends up having she ends up getting a lobotomy, which was still an experimental procedure at the time. And he would spend the rest of her life in a catatonic state. Tennessee Williams would take care of his sister the rest of his life. She was at, I think, almost every one of his premieres, and he always made sure he made a lot of money. He was a very successful man in his life, and he. He always made sure she got the best of care, but throughout, it left a real impression on him, and because of this, the fallen Southern Belle is a recurring, including Amanda Wingfield, right, and Glass Menagerie and others, and. The fallen Southern Belle is a recurring figure, as is, and listen, beauty that fades, and it's always got a tragic shortness of life is always a big part of Tennessee Williams' work. And insanity is something that is, ethereal and tissue thinned and can go away, and you don't know when it might happen, is also a big part of his work. And with that, I guess we can get into Streetcar. And in Streetcar, we get a main character here, Blanche, right, who is a Southern Belle, and again, she was the real Southern Belle. I mean, again, she Belle Reve, which is I think beautiful place is the translation of the title, and this is the ancestral family home that they'd always lived at. And again, this was one of those, four-columned the southern mansions that essentially, at some point that was a slave plantation. I don't know if we don't know if she lived there then or not. I don't think she did, but the family had now a couple generations later, and men in particular, don't always handle inherited money well, and they've squandered their fortune. She ended up having to sell the house, and she's washed up on the shores of her little sister, Stella, and her husband, Stanley, who will go on to become her, and meeting Stanley will be her fate. And I guess one more thing to bring up with his background here for Williams. Williams was also very attracted to the Greek tragedians, as most great playwrights are. And in Greece, in Greek theater, human emotion was a sort of a much more mysterious and exalted sort of thing. I mean, it was a sort of a conduit a little bit to the spirit world, and one could be taken over by a need. There's famously, some soldiers in like the Iliad get something. I think Achilles, right? The wrath of Achilles gets something. I think the literal translation. I don't remember the Greek word. I'm sorry. The wolf rage. It can be just, and the soldier will go out and just behave horribly and kill indiscriminately. For a period of time. There's a mother, famously in the Greek theater, who murders her two sons to get back her husband because he'd sacrificed her favorite daughter to win a battle. And so, I mean, again, these things, emotions were something you weren't necessarily, we very much kind of desacralized, or maybe that's not quite the right word, but certainly demystified emotions in our tale, right? We've gone from Freud, who kind of contained them within the family unit, at least somewhat, with a little bit of culture, I guess, in there too. And then since then, the scientists, we basically think it's a kind of a particular sort of a neural cocktail, almost as if some sort of mixologist, with a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of or if too much cortisol, and this is what can kind of throw us off. And probably it's a little more complicated than that. And certainly Williams subscribed to this thing that the emotions can be a huge thing and can kind of possess you almost like a demon in the right thing. And there is this culture has been sort of saturated with a kind of spiritual kind of emotion. And what I talked about just a few minutes ago, that the South had fallen. There is no more. And again, when cultural mores, we human beings come from a violent, extremely tumultuous, violent sort of place. And if you study chimpanzees, for example, you'll see this. And if you study smaller scale societies, like the Yanomami tribe in South America or something, who don't who have never known like running water or electricity or something, they act a little more like that. And you know what? It's in us too. You can see it in us now. Like, we're very much not nearly as violent a society as we were even 50 years ago. But check out the movies we watch and the entertainment we like, and there's it's in our dreams, right? It's in our dream lives and the stories we tell. It's still back there. And when something happens and you see society and all the parameters, the cop on the corner and the nosy neighbor and all the things you're worried about, the people you're worried about, what they think of you, when that all falls down, people will often kind of recede back into a sort of atavistic, sort of a more primal state. And that is, I think, what's happened to the people here in Tennessee Williams, and that is, I think, the best way to go about reading this. And the Old South is dead, and it's taken everything with it. And whatever's going to replace it hasn't happened yet, and we're in this sort of a purgatorial kind of chaos going now, and everyone's kind of falling back, and that's why you get and Stanley would be the ultimate example of that, right? And Stanley is sort of presented here as a little bit the new American man, the old Southern gentleman who Blanche will refer to over and over and over again, right? Has gone and has been kind of replaced by Stanley, who is the anti-gentleman, right? And really does behave just like a fucking ape, right? I mean, he literally goes to the bathroom with doesn't close. It sits down to go to the bathroom without closing the door. All right, I mean, he's barely house trained, and he does not think twice to slap his wife around if he thinks she needs a slap, even though she's pregnant, by the way. And he's also very much the alpha among his group of friends, and so much went into I think the creation of Stanley from it was just a unbelievably just pure genius creation here by Williams, who on the one hand Stanley is this sort of, again, the sort of primeval man kind of rising up now that civilization has sort of collapsed, the South has collapsed, who's come about. He's a little bit the new American man. He's pure capitalist. He's not dumb either, Stanley, right? He's ignorant. He's shrewd, and he hates all things that have to do with culture. Cannot stand poetry or English, says so. Gets angry when Blanche plays music. Has a terrible reaction. So all the things that I think most of us, certainly me, think makes life worth living, he loathes and has a really volatile, often reaction to. And we see, so on the one hand, he's that. On the other hand, again, a product of pure capitalism, and he's doing well, it seems like. He's the only one of his friends likely to get anywhere, Stella says at one point. And he seems to have risen at least a little bit in he's the captain of his bowling team, which seems to mean something, at least in their little world. And seems to be maybe on his way to, a relatively successful sort of career, and at least, achieving sort of, middle class, upper middle class sort of that status at some point. But Stanley is also, and again, this is Tennessee Williams. Let's not forget this, and it's just an amazing stroke. Again, he's got, he's an image, or he's a symbol, and symbols in literature are kind of like prisms. You ever seen the sort of the prism where sunlight kind of comes into it, and it's a glass prism, and it comes out every color of the rainbow right on the other side? That's kind of what a symbol is like. It should hold a lot of different things. And again, he is primeval man. He is the capitalist sort of. Again, capitalism is supposed to be not care about others. It's a winner take all. Everyone trying to win then becomes. And again, I don't think Adam Smith meant it that way. You think he just didn't have capitalism had nothing to do with morality. It wasn't trying to replace it though. But here it has kind of replaced it, and just a winner sort of take all, zero sum. And boy, is that how Stanley. If you have something I don't, he will take whatever he's really worried about what's his, assuming everyone else is trying to take something from him. So there's that. But there's also, and listen, this was again, an openly gay man. Not easy to be openly gay in 1947. I think this play comes out. Well, boy, difficult to say the least to be openly gay. And again, his father had called Stanley would have been the man his father kind of wanted him to be. His father used to call Williams a Nancy. He used to make fun of him because he was effeminate. Openly pick on him. He was the kind of man his father wanted to be. He was the kind of man, I think, also that stridently. And we do see Stanley all the time. He's just taking he's taking his clothes off every few seconds. It feels like, and he spends half the play, it seems like, shirtless. And we'll get into the actor maybe in a little bit, but who played a perfect guy to play him with the physicality and everything else. Marlon Brando, anyway, was the actor. Almost didn't want to say his name to put that in your head yet, but he was gorgeous. I mean, every girl, young lady in my class who watches this is sort of astonished by his sexuality and his prowess. So he struts around the stage kind of like a peacock, and in a sense, Williams manages to turn him into the play's sex symbol, right? Which is almost always the beautiful woman, and there are two beautiful women, and they pale in comparison to him in this play. So again, for the gay playwright to make a male sex object, and boy was he, but who's also stridently, couldn't be more heterosexual, and strutting around again like a peacock across those floorboards on the stage every night was some trick, man. It really was. And I guess I will get into a little bit of Marlon Brando now. Brando, those of you some of my younger students actually haven't heard of him, might have been the greatest. A lot of people, I think, if you were to ask the greatest American actor of the 20th century, I don't know if you get a consensus on that kind of a question, but I think the most common answer you're probably going to get would be Marlon Brando. I think he would win a contest. I don't think it would be unanimous. And most people consider his greatest performance to be the performance here in Streetcar, both on stage and on the screen. He just sort of took on the physicality part of it just perfectly. Again, you cannot take, and again, I actually think he's a bit of a flaw in the film because he just has a way of soaking in that screen in a way he couldn't possibly in an open air theater. Anyway, that's Brando. Anyway, Blanche is Blanche is really the main character, however, which by the way gets a little bit lost. It feels like in the film, but she is the main character in the play, and she's running from Belle Reve, or she's had to, and we find out she's running from more than that. We'll find out that she had been a school teacher. She loves poetry, and she was an English teacher, and as it turned out, she was having an affair with a student. We find out there's even more of a sort of a traumatic event in her life before there are. She was in love when she was a teenage girl. I think she was 18, he was 19, or they were both 19. Her friend, her boyfriend Alan, who was apparently, and again, told that he was a very delicate soul and wrote poetry and was beautiful, and she really loved him. It turns out she ends up catching him with another man. He was I forgot what a derelict or a reprobate or something as Stella calls him. Which again we wouldn't say about gay people now, but again, being gay, and honestly, this really is true. Being gay back then, most people would have, if you were gay and came out to your parents, you probably got disowned. And honestly, all your parents' friends probably supported your parents in that. They didn't come rallying behind you. So I mean, it was rough, man. We've come a long way since it's hard. It's such a long way. I think it's hard for a lot of my young students to really understand this. But the revulsion we feel when we think of pedophilia now. And sounds like an awful thing to say, but I think it's true. I think people did feel that way towards the sense of sort of the disgust that it was so wrong. So anyway, it's presented as a sort of tragedy that this man she has in her past, and she catches him with another man, says, "You disgust me," and he goes and commits suicide. And she never quite gets her. There's polka music playing, which is why polka music kind of keeps playing whenever she's having trouble in the play. And she remembers hearing the gunshot. But then, almost like she gets stuck there. And like a lot of people get stuck there, like the psychological reaction to traumatic events is often to keep trying to recreate that event in some way, or a simulacrum, of that event. And what is she? She becomes a school teacher. She has an affair with students, who's a teenage boy, right? We get what might be the wildest scene in this is the paperboy scene, right, where she's get over here, I want to kiss you sweetly, softly, right on the mouth, and grabs the he's not a little paperboy selling subscriptions, but it's a teenage boy, and there's all kinds of things going on in that scene, right? That he was drinking a cherry cola, quote, wink, wink. There's the cigarette lighter he's trying to get like a phallic symbol, right? And the flame, won't go up, and she has to sort of steady his hand, and then it does. And he kind of beats a quick retreat after she does kiss him. So we also learned that she started having compulsive sexual flings with the soldiers that were based nearby. They were forbidden. Her to a point where the generals or whoever was in charge of the army barracks forbid her from going there. The sergeant probably, sorry, so she's always had this almost vampire sort of attraction to young men, and again in this sad pathological way, trying to sort of not even sure what the hell she's doing, but trying to just somehow make it right this time with this next young man, right? And then anyway, that's her story. And she also puts on airs, and she still keeps pretending she's this Southern belle and won't let that go. And of course, Stanley has just volatile reactions to this. Her sister Stella, who's much more pragmatic, let's just say, than she is. does what she can to help her. But Stella is the one who, and again, we get a lot of Darwinistic themes here. Again, the survival of the fittest, and Blanche is the one who cannot adapt to this new world, and will not live through it. At least her body does actually is still alive at the end, but her mind is gone. Her Stella, her sister, is the one who has adapted, and she's fastened herself to a very strong man in Stanley, but also kind of a brutal, and again, the opposite of the gentleman caller. They were all raised to sort of marry in her family, but she actually finds Stanley physical and vital and vibrant and exciting, and it's sort of, and the sexual tension between the two of them is sort of just always there. I mean, she openly makes comments about things like she's when she says Stanley's the only one likely to get anywhere in his whole crowd, and Blanche is like, well, what makes you think Stanley's gonna? I mean, and she finds him repulsive, and Stella's like, well, just look at him. She's like, I looked at him, and I ain't seen the stamp of genius even on the Stanley's forehead. And then remember what Stella says back to her? She says, it isn't on his forehead. And it ain't genius, right? I mean, Stanley's getting it done in the bedroom. And Stanley brings this up later when he's trying to convince her. So enough with his sister already. Don't you want to get those colored lights going and those sounds going in the night again, and not worrying about having to worry about your sister next door? So she is fastened to him in a very carnal sort of sexual way. And for the most part, even with him hitting her, they seem to have, what can I call it, a happy relationship? I think it almost seems that way. That she's kind of willing to take the occasional slap. She's absolutely great. Doesn't seem to make her fall out of love with him in any way. And we get this. Again, the first time we see Stanley, right, is coming back, and he's like, Stella, Stella, right? You're screaming for his wife, and that famous call, and she's like, stop yelling at me like that, Stanley. And she comes in, and he's holding a piece, meat from the butcher's, right? And it's described by Williams himself in the stage directions, right? Meat wrapped in butcher paper, the blood soaking through the paper, right? And he takes the fucking meat, and he just, he fucking he heaves the meat, up. She's on the balcony, and she like catches it all in a flutter. So I mean, again, right away we get this brilliant image of Stanley as the caveman coming home with the kill, right? Or at least the 20th century version, of that. It's an amazing, sort of little trick there. And then of course you get Blanche coming in all nervous, and boy, that first time Blanche sees him too, she's kind of peek, almost like a child, peeking out at something. She's scared of him. She's turned on by him, and that's all. The actress does a very good job of that in the film. Forget the actress. It wasn't Jessica Tandy who played it on the screen, which is unfortunate. Or I mean, on the stage. Later, we get the poker night, right? And the poker night is this. It's just a deep kind of male ritual, right? I mean, you can almost see this is almost a recreation of the men gathering around the oldest tree in the tribe to plan their attack. They're about to go to war with the tribe next door or something like that, right? That is what this sort of feels like. And no women are allowed, at this poker game. And again, the men, and so anyway, Stella, takes Blanche out for the night. They don't come back, I think, till at 2:30 in the morning, and Stanley is a bit drunk by now, and he's not having a good run of cards, and he wants it. Why don't you women go upstairs with your niece? And they don't. They go in the other room. They start playing music. He screams and turns the music off. She meets Mitch, who's oafish and clumsy and not at all elegant, but is at least who seems kind. But he's also weak, as we'll see later. And he kind of is kind, and he's totally taken with Blanche and all these sort of Southern Belle accentuations and airs she's always putting on that annoy everyone else. He just finds them just hopelessly romantic. So they have a little bit of a connection. She plays music and starts dancing for him, but he kind of tries to dance, and he almost looks like a bear. The dancing, he's a bit clumsy, but with a little connection going on. Then, of course, Stanley comes in. Enough of the music. He hates music. Again, anything pure. invention of culture itself. He doesn't have much time for. Turns off the music when they turn it on the second time, right? He doesn't just turn it off. He's like a gorilla, right? He just takes it and throws the whole radio right out the window. And that's when Stella gets upset, and she goes in, kind of gives him a talking to, and boom, she gets the back of Stanley's hand, and the guys all grab him, drag him into the shower, run cold water over him. The girls run upstairs to Eunice and Steve's place to hide from him. But eventually, when he starts to sort of come to, the guys all skip out of there. They barely got him. They were barely strong enough to the 3 or 4 of them to get him in there. But then he starts calling upstairs for his. I think we get a very different Stanley, right? He is still sort of primal and animalistic, but he's almost childlike. I want my baby back. Where's my baby? You better put her on the phone. Send her back down here. And he's screaming, Stella, Stella. He goes out into the rain. His shirt's all torn up. Stella. And then and Eunice, to her credit, who's a tough lady. She's grown up among all of these people, right? She didn't come in here from another family. She grew up in this tough world. She's like, go back inside before I call the cops, and they put the hose on you again. Which lets us know again, this is not the first time this has happened. But he's not going to give up. He keeps screaming. Stella does come out. She looks over the balcony. Sort of looks down at him, and he stops, and he's just sitting there breathing heavy, and the rain's pouring in. He's sort of staring up at her, and then. She comes down the stairs. The door is open. And by the way, the door, when it was the New Orleans was one of those southern adobe sort of architectures. And so the door, on the stage, the door would have been dark, and it would have just had an archway, which I think I've heard was supposed to meant to look a little like a cave opening, right? And the archway instead of the rectangular opening. But anyway, it's open, and he sort of lays his hand on her pregnant belly. She strokes his hair, and he picks her up, turns around and carries her, disappears with her into the flat, doesn't even close the door behind him, but that's sort of the closing of that scene. The next scene is Blanche coming down the next morning. Oh my God, I can't believe you came back down here. And you see Stella, who's in this, and they went at it all night, and you see Stella, in this post-coital, dreamy, happy haze, and she's like, well, I'm glad you didn't come down, and then she's like, I've got to get you out of this, we've got to, she's like, you keep taking it for granted, I'm in something I want to be out of. She doesn't want to get away from Stanley. She's like, he apologized, he went to get the car greased, it's like, you're making too much of it, let's just, and then that, it kind of goes on like that, but, over, as the play goes on, there's more and more tension, obviously, with Stanley. And again, there is a sense of this is her fate. And she says that. She's like, the first time I met that man, I thought to myself, there stands my executioner. And boy, that's going to be kind of true, right? We will get Stanley gets increasingly cruel. He tells Mitch, who was falling in love with Blanche, that was going to be her savior. Again, it might have been a crude, lowly version of a gentleman caller, but it was good enough, and it was as good as she was going to find, and he at least was nice and loved her. But Stanley hears about all the goings on at the Flamingo Hotel, which is where she'd been living, and she slept having sex with all kinds of guys. Why she got fired from her job for sleeping with the students and all this, and he finds out about it from a traveling salesman that comes into his work, and he tells Mitch, and Mitch breaks it off with her. And at this point, and again, Blanche has been getting increasingly less and less tethered to reality as it's going. She was already sort of flighty and extremely sort of high-strung. She's now totally lost, pretty much completely lost that touch with reality, and she's dressed in these boas and these fake furs and this makeup that's so heavy it almost looks like a little girl sort of dressing up, playing dress up with her mother's makeup. And then Stella's water breaks, and Stanley has to take her to the hospital, and he comes back and finds Blanche like that. And he's sort of looking over at her, and and she's going, and there's been also this recurring person she keeps talking about, Shep Huntley. And Shep Huntley was a man who was once supposedly completely infatuated with her, one of her old gentleman callers who was struck it rich, in Texas with an oil field or something. And this whole time she's like, oh, I gotta get hold of Shep, and she's convinced he's gonna be the one to save her. Mitch is sort of like the the safety school, if that doesn't work out. But then now, Mitch is gone, and she's saying that he's going to be coming to get, and Stanley knows that this obviously she's just sort of lost her mind, and he's like, it's nothing but lies and imagination, right? And he's like, the imagination is something he's the enemy of. And he thunders. Again, you see him as she's talking, and as he starts taking his shirt off, and she's like, don't disrobe in front of me anymore, please. And he's like, oh, this is all I'm going to take my clothes off. This is all I'm going to do now. Then he goes, but he ends up and he puts his silk pajamas on. And he doesn't have a shirt on. And he tells Blanche that these are the pajamas. The last time he wore them, he only wears them on special nights because he's having a baby. And he's like, the last time he wore them was on Stella and his honeymoon. So again, these are the pajamas he deflowered her sister in, which makes the rape that's about to happen, that much more cruel and horrible. And you just see him sort of stalking behind her as she's talking. He's kind of coming closer. He's sort of looking at her, and it really is like a lion and a gazelle, and that is what's going on here. It is, this sort of play goes beyond just morality, and yeah, it's awful. It's not that you're supposed to like Stanley or forgive him for how he is, or for the horrible, for raping, and more or less, yeah, he may as well. He would have been actually kinder to murder. It really would have for what he did to her. And no, it's not that it's not supposed to like, but there's also a sense that there's always guys like that, and just like there's always women like Blanche, and somehow they always seem to meet, right? And it's just sort of a little bit. There's lions and there's gazelles, and if you put a lion and a gazelle in the same room, only one thing's going to happen, right? And it's not going to be on this, and only the lion is going to live, and that's so. In a way, it was sort of fate. This was sort of fated as well. It goes beyond just the obvious morality of the thing, but great heroism, I think. After she snaps the bottle, and her hands are shaking. She sort of holds it up to his. He's like, what'd you do that for? She's like, to break the broken end in your face. He's like, I bet you would. I bet you would like to do that. And he's coming closer and closer. She's like, I will. She's like, someone's got to help me. And she's sort of half talking to him, half almost as if she's addressing the audience or something, or God, right? And she's lost touch with reality, but some deep part of her really does realize sort of what's happening here. And then he makes a move towards her. She goes to try to. He easily grabs her wrist and just shakes it. She makes her drop the bottle. He said, Tiger, drop that bottle. And then he said, you and I have had this date with one another from the beginning. And what is a devastating line. And he picks her up, just like he picked up her sister and carried her into our apartment earlier. Takes her over to the beds, and the curtain sort of, or the lights go down. You don't see it, but he does rape her. And then it's not quite over yet. The next morning is the last poker game, the second and last poker game that's going on. And Blanche has completely gone crazy at this point. And they really did have to call some doctors to take her off to a mental institution. And she's... and Stella is just beside herself, but then the line she gives is sort of devastating, and she's crying to Eunice, the neighbor upstairs, and Eunice is like, "There's nothing you could have done. There's nothing you could have done," and she's like, and then Stella says to her, she goes, "I don't know what else to do. I couldn't believe her story and go on living with Stanley." And just the betrayal of one sister to the other there. And again, not that Stanley, she doesn't say, right, Stanley would never do such a thing. And she doesn't even say, I didn't believe it. She's like, I couldn't and keep living with him. Meaning she made a choice. She knows Stanley did it. And she's got a baby now. And she has to take care of that baby. And this is late 1940s, New Orleans, and what, she's either going to be a fucking waffle waitress, right? Or she's going to live with Stanley and try and do what and by the way, which would put her at the mercy of, she'd be having she'd be serving meals to every day, grabbing at her, pulling at, her life would it really would be a much less life and a much more dangerous life for her and her child. So it is understandable she did. And again, she is the one who adapts right? Adapts to this new environment and survives. And Blanche is the poor soul who isn't able to. In the last we see of Blanche, she is coming out, and they tell her it's Shep Huntley, right? That's gentleman caller she's been fantasizing about all play. That, oh, Shep Huntley's here, and she thinks she's going to meet Shep Huntley. Is really going to be a doctor and a nurse to take her off to a mental institution where she will spend the rest of her life. And also around the place, she said this to the young man she kisses earlier with the newspaper subscriptions. She's like, I've always depended upon the kindness of strangers. She says that 2 or 3 times throughout the play. And again, that is harkening right back to that world of, I think anyway, Greek literature you know, the Homeric epics, essentially, and I can't get too into explaining this, but the real baseline meaning, the same way the collapse of southern civilization is behind this. It's the need going from, if you're going to go from a warlord culture in Greece to the cradle of civilization as we know it, people have to be able to start trusting each other. And so basically you have to depend upon the kindness of strangers. They don't ever say it exactly like that, but I do think that is her version of that. And again, to that famous sort of trope in Western literature, and at the beginning of the baseline of Western literature, that's the kindness of strangers is the unsplittable atom at the beginning of civilization. When you can have that, then you can have civilization. So anyway, the last lines, poor Blanche speaks. She goes out, "You're not Shep Huntley, you're not," and they do. They manage to get her, and they kind of, the doctor sort of plays along, and he's nice. He's like, "It's all right." He puts his arms out for, like a Southern gentleman would, by the way. She puts her arm through his, and they walk off, and she pats his arm at the end, and she looks at him and she says, "Whoever you are, I've always depended upon the kindness of strangers." And that's not quite it either. The very last scene we get will be, Stella crying on the stairs. Stanley sort of, softening a bit. He was also cruel even in that last scene to Stella. And he's like, Stella? Stella? And he goes over and he comforts her. I was like, it's all right, babe. And she doesn't reject him, which they totally fucked up in the film version, by the way, which I still can't believe, but anyway, he embraces her, and we end with this sort of triptych of the husband, wife, child. And they are going to go on and survive, and the world is going to go on, and Blanche is not, and that's just what happens. So Williams does not leave us with any easy answers here. Anyway, that is one of the greatest works by our greatest playwright.